What's going on, YouTube? Today's video is going to serve a couple of different purposes. The first of which will be to show off a new product from a good friend of mine at Baldknobber Armament. I will put a timestamp here in the video if you just want to skip to this part, since I'm sure that's what a lot of you are here for. But I also want to talk about the Nightforce NXS 2.5 to 10 by 24, which I believe is one of the best combat optics ever made, which is why it was used for so long within SOCOM by Navy SEALs and other groups within US SOCOM. So, getting right into it, the Nightforce 2.5 to 10 by 24. This is a very coveted optic by cloners. A lot of people like me who clone US service rifles. There are a ton of different weapon systems that were used by US SOCOM, which implemented this optic. This was a very common optic you would see on weapon systems like the FN SCAR, as well as the HK416 and HK417, and a multitude of others, some of the weirder builds like the SEAL Team's recce builds. And this was used on a lot of different guns, to put it simply. And the reason for that, I think, boils down to a couple of key features of this optic system. One is that when this first came out around the late 2000s, early 2010s, this was the pinnacle of scope technology as far as glass clarity and just ruggedness goes. The Nightforce NXS line has a legendary reputation for being extremely rugged. And this particular model, the NXS 2.5 to 10 by 24, I think one of the reasons that this was so widely used is its size and form factor. So 2.5 to 10, in my opinion, is a great magnification range for a combat optic, especially when used with some kind of piggyback red dot sight or an offset red dot sight, like on a 45-degree mount. Either way, this kind of covers all of your bases. It allows you to target ID on the higher magnification range, allows you to scan landscapes and search for targets with lower magnification. And then with a piggyback red dot sight, you don't lose out on that true one power up close and personal capability, which is one reason why a lot of the industry has moved to optics that are what you would call an LPVO, like a 1x4, 1x6, or even more recently there are 1x8 and 1x10 LPVOs, with the sales pitch to those being that you can have an optic that kind of does everything. It allows you to go down to one power and it acts kind of like a red dot, or go up to your higher magnification range for shooting further distances and for a greater ability to identify targets. For me personally, this setup, which is the 2.5 to 10 with a 1 power red dot mounted somewhere in conjunction with it, is a preferential setup, and I'll explain why. A lot of you may have noticed before that on the market for rifle scopes, there's kind of a common theme in that a lot of scopes, that when you look at their magnification range, this is speaking specifically about variable power optics where you can actually zoom in and out, there's kind of a ratio that a lot of them follow between the lowest power and the highest power of that optic. A lot of them are either going to be a 3 times or a 4 times ratio. So like this one, for instance, with it being 2.5 on the low end and then 10 power on the high end, well, 2.5 times 4 is 10. So this is a 4 times zoom ratio. And then the math gets even easier when you look at LPVOs today, because they're all 1x6, 1x8, or 1x10 for the most part. So those would have 6, 8, or 10 zoom ratios respectively. Now, why that's important and why I'm giving you guys a surprise math lesson is the higher that ratio is, in other words, the more difference there is between the lowest magnification and the highest magnification of that scope, you actually end up suffering in terms of performance in some aspects. So things like your eye box, if you're familiar with that term. Your eye box is essentially the area behind the scope where your eyeball can be, where you will still be able to see an image through the scope. Now, something like this, which has a relatively low zoom ratio of 4 power, this allows you to have more kind of wiggle room behind the scope. You don't have to be right behind it, directly in line with the center of the tube in order for that image to appear. And so that aids you in shooting from more unconventional positions and just makes it more natural feeling. When you get behind the rifle, put your cheek on the stock and get behind the scope, it's just easier to find that image. So when you move into a variable power optic, that is one consideration, and it's why manufacturers don't just make a 1 to 50 power optic that just does everything. Because the more magnification, or the more difference in magnification between your low end and high end, that's going to require either more lenses or lenses with a more extreme curvature inside the scope. And so that will do things like reduce your eye box. It'll also reduce the light transmission through the scope, as well as the optical clarity you're going to have. In other words, how good your image quality is going to be on the higher end. For that reason, a lot of manufacturers stick with magnification ranges like 3:9 or 4:12 or things that keep that ratio relatively low. Now, there are quality optics out there with a higher ratio, such as the Nightforce ATACR 1:8. Now, understand that is an extremely expensive optic, and they've done things like going from a 30mm tube, like on the NXS series, up to a 34mm tube to somewhat alleviate some of those issues, and I think that's a reasonable accommodation. But for a combat optic, you don't necessarily want something that's going to have a really restrictive eye box and something that's going to give you poorer image quality on the higher end. So where I think that the NXS 2.5 to 10x24 does somewhat fall short is in the fact that it is a second focal plane optic, and that's one reason why these have been aged out and replaced with newer optics like the ATACR 1:8 or the Vortex Razor 1:6 and some others, is because those bring upgraded or updated reticles, matching turrets that'll have the same subtensions as your reticle, as well as front focal plane capabilities, which in my opinion, is a force multiplier on a rifle. But that being said, for a combat optic, for something that's easy to learn how to use, something that's extremely rugged, and that is going to allow you to quickly acquire your sight picture and give you a high quality image, I think these still hold up very well considering their age. Rifle scopes are kind of like iPhones, in my opinion. By the time you get the newest and latest and greatest, it's already outdated. That being said, I think these have held up very well. Now, you may have noticed I've been talking about how these work so great with a red dot sight mounted on top, because that kind of fills in that gap that you're missing compared to a true LPVO where you would have a 1-power capability built into the optic. That red dot just kind of fills that role. So I've been talking about that, yet this upper is lacking a red dot of any kind. And the reason for that is I've been waiting on a new product from Baldknobber Arms, which will allow me to mount this. This is a JP Enterprises J-Point. This is actually an older style red dot sight that they still sell on their website and that is fairly affordable. These were used within DevGru and within the SEAL teams for quite a while. A lot of people actually mistake these for the Doctor sight, which is another really common micro optic. And there is a mount like this that accommodates the Doctor optic as well. But this, from Baldknobber Arms, is his 30mm J-Point Mount, which is made to be a very faithful replica of the one made by Wilcox and commonly used within the SEAL teams. So some differences between this and the Doctor version of the mount that accommodates a Doctor sight. Obviously is going to be the screw pattern. They're not cross-compatible because the screws are different sizes and spacing, but also because the J-Point has a plastic housing rather than aluminum, they incorporated some protective wings on the side to actually protect the body of the optic. So really quickly, we'll pull this out and show you what all comes with this. Because like I said, these are still available, and I think they're just a hair over $200 most places. So this is one of the easiest clone optics to pick up. I believe these have changed very little since the SEAL teams were using them pretty regularly back in the early 2010s. They do come with some stuff underneath the packaging. You have, just like on the Doctor sight, you have a little plastic cover to go over it. This actually acts as your off button, believe it or not. These have a daylight sensor that auto-adjusts your brightness of your red dot. And so essentially to turn it off, you cover it up, which covers up the daylight sensor to preserve your battery. And unfortunately, just like the Doctor sight, these have to be removed in order to change the battery. So I do recommend using that protective hood when the rifle is not in use. And as you can see, you also get your battery in the package. This is a CR2032, which is an easily accessible battery. These are not hard to find at all. And if I can ever get the sticker off here, I will install it and show you guys how all that works. So these work very similar to a Trijicon RMR, which is a very popular miniature red dot sight. So you just have a very simple battery compartment on the bottom. And so now, in theory, we should have a dot that you can see, which I'm not sure if the camera is picking that up or not. I can see it. But yeah, you can just barely kind of see it there. But this is pretty straightforward to mount. Just need to find the appropriately sized Allen key, remove these 2 screws. This does feature the recoil lug posts, just like the genuine Wilcox version would. So you'll get it seated in the correct place, and then you will drop in your screws. I personally don't think that Loctite is going to be necessary for these 2 screws, given that you're tightening these screws against a plastic optic. It really shouldn't take too much torque to keep this secured in place. And there you have it. So I'll go over the kind of features of this and the specs a little bit. This is 7076 T6 aluminum, and it is Type 3 hard anodized, so just like the real Wilcox. And I'd like to point out that unlike some other replica Wilcox mounts that I've seen, he has done an excellent job of getting the correct chamfering and just the correct dimensions. I mean, everything lines up beautifully on this mount. I mean, this, aside from the fact that it does not have any markings on it, is completely indistinguishable from a real Wilcox mount, which regularly retails for well over $600 if you can find one. Although, he didn't want to create a problem in the market where people were just engraving the Wilcox logo on these and trying to sell them as the real thing. So I should have showed this before I mounted the optic, but there actually is a little dimple underneath where the optic mounts. Or I'll just go ahead and show it. But so if you're ever looking to buy one of these and somebody's selling it as a real Wilcox mount, look for the little dimple that he's machined into these. That is your giveaway that this is the repro mount and is not worth as much as the real Wilcox one. Now, that being said, if you are interested in getting one of these engraved to look like the real Wilcox mount, I'll cut in some photos of what the real one looks like as far as the engravings go. Sigwo Arms in Springfield, Missouri has worked with me on making a file with the correct images to engrave on here, so you can send yours to them, and for a small fee they'll engrave that. So I am planning on doing that with mine, because again, with that dimple that he's engraved on here, it's going to be hard for somebody to sell it as the real thing. So obviously, something that I guess I should have mentioned before, this replaces the top ring cap of your Nightforce 30mm ultralight rings. So we'll remove this really quick. And I'm going to reuse the screws that Nightforce sent me with the rings, because I believe that's the intent. The mount does not come with its own screws for actually attaching the ring cap to the base. And this would probably be a lot easier if I had a thinner screwdriver, but see if I can get that fished in there. There we go. And I'll go back and mount this more properly later. You'll want to make sure there's even spacing on the gap on both sides of the ring. This will just make sure that your red dot is level and that your adjustments will be true left, right, up, down when you're making them at the range. These screws I probably will put some Loctite on, but for the time being I'm just gonna kind of snug these down and give you guys a look at the full package. So if you couldn't tell from the video, the fit and finish on these mounts is flawless. I know that Baldknobber Arms put a lot of work into these mounts, and they just turned out fantastic. I'm super excited to have my hands on one. So we'll see if I can kind of get an angle. I have to take my suppressor off. There we go. See if I can get an angle looking down that. Yeah, there we go. So you can see that the lens of the optic just barely clears your elevation turret. So that's very nice. So this keeps the red dot as low as possible without being occluded by your elevation turret. So lastly, I'll talk about where you can pick up one of these mounts. I know that there are a couple different retailers planning on carrying them. I believe Baldknobber Arms is also going to be selling them on his website, so I'll link that down in the description. I believe places like Thoroughbred Armament are also planning on carrying them, so definitely go check these out. My understanding is these are going to be a limited time mount. So they're not going to be around forever, and just like in the past when people have made replicas of these Wilcox mounts, when they're gone, people are going to be price gouging on them, and it's not going to be too fun. So there's our little protector on there that essentially shuts off the optic. And there you have it. So if you have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comment section below. I'm more than happy to interact with you guys and answer any questions that you have. Sorry this video went on for a little longer than usual. Typically I try to not nerd out too much on you guys, but it's hard not to when you're talking about optical science. So anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and go check me out on Instagram where I'll have some more high quality photos of this setup here with the gun all put together. And thank you guys for watching.